Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links video. Today what we thought we'd do is kind of talk a little bit about the meta and more kind of how we think things are going to develop and what we think Konami is going to do after the World Championship qualifiers finish for Rush. So basically after a GRF, or in this case a World Championship qualifiers, Konami tend to hit us with some limits, some changes, some bans. Basically, they'll either limit/ban some cards, or they'll change some skills if they think something needs a buff or something needs a nerf, and they'll use the data they gather from the GRF, or in this case WCQ, to kind of come up with some changes. And what are we really expecting them to change after this latest event? My suspicion is going to be that a lot of people are going to have their eyes on Machine. Machine is obviously a very, very strong deck. Until the actual results are in and we can see what the top 100 players' decks were, we can see the players that are all going to Worlds, and we can see what decks they were playing, we won't actually have a good idea of what the solidified World Championship qualifier meta is, because again, over the course of the weekend, it can develop quite drastically. But I think it's safe to say going into it that Machines are the favourite. Machines have won the most events, they by far have the most representation, and they do seem just the strongest on paper. Steel Mechlord Mirror Innovator is just such a fantastic boss monster that does everything you would want, from being able to boost its own attack up by a ton, recycling other cards back into your deck to be used later on and to prevent deck out, as well as gaining a moderate attack boost as well as piercing, which is just really, really good. That boss monster really does just do everything. But I don't really think we're necessarily going to see a hit to Machine. Although Machine is pretty much the best deck right now, at least going into this weekend, I don't think it is head and shoulders above every other deck. Now that might just be my own personal bias because I am quite fond of the Machine deck, but I do feel like other decks can still beat it. We've seen Noodles take it down, we've seen Cyburst beat it, we've seen Blue Eyes take it down. We have seen quite a few decks that are able to hold their own against the Machines. It's just Machines overall seem to have that extra little bit of a leg up. The other reason I don't think Machines are going to get hit is because Machines are still relatively new. Mirror Innovator itself is the only real problem card, and that card only came out less than a month ago as of recording. So I think hitting it now does seem a little bit early, as well as the fact it will really just hurt Machine decks going forward. Mirror Innovator really is the best boss monster Machines have pretty much ever gotten, even when we start to include these other boss monsters such as Cyber Dragons or the Jinzo cards, which again is an archetype, not just the legend card Jinzo. They still rely on Mirror Innovator to be their primary source of beating set 3 pass. It's just always a really, really valuable card in any kind of Machine build. But I don't think it really makes sense to hit that. It's like people keep saying, oh, we need to hit Dragius, because Dragius is a menace, it's constantly showing up. Even now, we are still seeing it in aggro decks. But Dragius is an awkward one to hit because it's an anime card, and so is Mirror Innovator, but to a lesser extent, as well as the fact that there are so many support cards that work with it. In the future, we'll be getting some Dragius fusions, and I think a lot of people are saying, oh, just get rid of it now, maybe bring it back later, but I think that does get a little bit awkward. I think the main offender for me specifically is Essel, because Essel is a very polarizing card. Essel is a card that since it very first came out, I have been against. And as the decks that Essel supported, which was primarily aggro, sort of fell out of the meta, I think people started to forget a little bit about this card and what it does to the game. Essel basically reads that if you get really, really lucky, you get to just kind of win the game or put yourself in a position that seems almost unfair to the point where it's kind of difficult to lose. So what does that mean? So first off, you have to open the Essel in your opening hand. You have to lose the coin flip and go second. Then the cards you mill have to be very specific. You have to mill either Mirror Innovator and a Machine, or you have to mill like your Dragius, for example, depending on what deck we're playing. Then we can special summon one of those bodies to the field, and bam, we have just gotten a free card, because the Essel doesn't cost anything, the cost is milling, so we haven't lost any cards, and we've just plussed a card, so we're now up to 6 cards, and we've cheated out a boss monster that usually would -2 us, so instead of getting -2 to get a boss monster, we've +1 to get a boss monster, which, when you really think about it like that, is completely insane. As well as the fact that, again, Dragius and Mirror Innovator are always going to be the best targets for this because they can beat set 3 pass on turn 2. Mirror Innovator, we can just shuffle one card back from our graveyard into our deck, and then it gains Piercing, it can just attack through and get a ton of damage in, and Dragius can just attack one of the monsters and then get that second attack direct for that 2500 in, which is really difficult for your opponent to beat, especially if you have a handful of useful cards. You could maybe summon a second boss monster, maybe a second Dragius or a second Mirror Innovator, both of which would be completely insane. Or you just have a ton of back row. You can just set 3 behind this board and it's still really, really difficult for your opponent to out. That is the issue though with Essel, is you're not always going to accomplish that. There will be several games that you'll probably play in a row where you just won't open Essel, or you'll be going first, or you will open Essel and you'll go second, but you won't mill the boss monster. And in those situations, a lot of people will be like, well, yeah, Essel's not very good, right? Oh, you milled some cards, you maybe +1 on a body, which then you could use to tribute off. And it's like, that is why Essel is so deceptively frustrating. Because basically, people see that card and they go, oh, you know, occasionally you'll just win the game. But it's only occasionally, it doesn't matter, it doesn't happen all the time. The issue is that sometimes it does happen all the time. Sometimes you will just lose to Essel several games in a row and it'll be very, very frustrating. And I think that is the reason I don't like Essel, because it is a frustrating card. The card basically relies entirely on luck, which I do not think is a good thing. It also artificially makes aggro and machine a lot stronger, because I do think they gain additional value off of Essel other decks don't, because being able to cheat out a boss body is still reasonably good. A lot of decks would be quite happy to do that, but machines and Dragies get that little bit extra. They can kill your opponent that much quicker. They get all that extra big damage in on turn 1, or in this case turn 2, which is really, really strong. And I think that has somewhat artificially made machine and aggro seem a little bit stronger than maybe they otherwise would be. So what I would like is for Essel to either be straight up banned, because that card is just annoying. I think just get rid of it. The card was originally designed to be a side deck card that you bring in when you know you're almost certainly going second and try and kind of cheese something out of it. A little bit like Ghost Cyclone. That was its original purpose, but it did find some other niche uses. In Duel Links, it feels extremely sacky because you don't even get to choose when you're going first or second, so it's just put it in and pray. Now, Essel does also just mill 2, which is quite nice for a lot of decks, so that is something. But I think when you do high roll with it, it feels really, really bad for your opponent. But what I would like to do is, again, either see it banned or limit 3. I think if you put it to limit 3, you now can't play it with Dragius and with Mirror Innovator, which is pretty good. I think that does kind of solve the problem, because other decks using it, I think it's probably fine. The major issue that's going to have is now any other card that can be abused with Essel would then also be on limit 3. I don't think that's the end of the world anyway, because Dragius sort of already is bullying any other good boss monsters onto the limit 3 list anyway, so I don't think it would really change much. I think, again, Essel to limit 3 would solve a lot of the problems. You could also put it to 2, but the only issue putting it to 2 or 1 is that now it just becomes even sackier, right? Now, if your opponent draws the 1 of or the 2 of, it feels a lot worse than if your opponent at least draws one of their 3 ofs, because you're like, well, at least I kind of expect you to draw Essel when you're running 3 copies. If you're running 1 copy and see it, now I feel like I've just been mega sacked, which is really not where I want to be. I've also seen some people talk about putting Extra Spice the Elite Noodle Ninja to 3, and I don't think this is going to matter too much. I think realistically, putting Extra Spice to 3 is going to hurt Pyros in the future when we get other limit 3 cards. So I think if it did go to limit 3, it would just have to come off of limit 3 in the future. So it wouldn't really make a huge deal. I think realistically, Noodle Ninjas are only really strong right now because they don't have any mandatory cards that are limit 3, which lets them use all of those very interesting trap cards that other decks can't use. If we take that away, I think that pretty much kills Noodle Ninja, which, you know, some people might want to see Noodle Ninjas go, and I think that's also fine. But in the future, we will be getting fusions using Extra Spice. And when that happens, obviously we're going to want to be able to play it as many copies as possible. And I do think there are better Pyro cards that will be coming out in the future that will also be on limit 3. And we don't really want to have multiple limit 3s in kind of the one deck. I think that kind of really hurts the consistency and is really going to force it to kind of struggle to find its identity. Now, you could make the argument that Light Machines already has this between Acebreaker and Mirror Innovator, but realistically, we don't even need Acebreaker for that deck to be strong. Mirror Innovator is plenty strong on its own. I think that's kind of it for cards that people think are problematic. I think then we just go over to the skills. I've seen some people say that they want Ultimate Bond to get changed, and the fix that I have seen people talk about is somehow making it so you can't boost the Mirror Innovator with the Aim Eagle. Now, you could make that as part of the skill. It'd be very, very awkward. But I don't know. I think it seems very heavy-handed to try and do something like that. Now, they could do it, and I think it would be fine. I think if you can stop getting that 1000 boost on the Mirror Innovator, it does make the deck more healthy, because having a 3400 monster that can boost up to 41 with piercing is pretty ridiculous. So I would like to see that interaction stopped if possible, but I think putting that in this skill is going to be a little bit awkward, and so I'm not sure Konami would want to go down that route. Realistically, I don't really think any other skill needs a nerf. I think the Pyro Noodle skill, pretty much fine. I think, again, if you change it in any way, that deck's just going to immediately fall apart, which we did already expect it to fall apart with the rise of Dragius and with the rise of the Mirror Innovator, which it hasn't quite fallen off. We have been able to adapt a little bit with the noodles, but it's not where it was, let's just put it that way. Then the Cyburst deck, I think, is probably fine. I don't think that needs a hit. Aggro, I would like to see get hit, but I think Essel is the hit to aggro. I don't think realistically we can change Hammer Crush Deal, because that skill is almost a nothing skill as it is. And then the other decks I think are so far down the tier list that hitting them just doesn't make sense. So I think that's all I would change. We just get rid of Essel, and I think that fixes everything. It's a funny concept, but I think if Essel does get hit, I think people will then immediately latch onto something else that is going to be a problematic card or deck or skill in the format. And basically we'll just keep doing this. As one thing gets hit, we'll then latch onto something else that's a problem. So maybe this is a problem that doesn't really need fixing. But me, personally, I would really love to see Essel go away. And I think the most healthy way to do that is going to be slap limit 3 on it. So thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.